So basically, this is the vendor track, right? And we are going to talk about a bit of the telco work that we have done from WSO2. I think the track is organized well because I'll be talking about what we're doing from a WSO2 perspective. Then Johannes will be coming in next. We'll be talking about the standard from GSM Association and basically how GSMA supports this initiative. And then we basically have a vendor presentation as well, basically on how this has been implemented in a real world case study. So I will be talking about APIs in a telco perspective. I'm sure you would have listened to some of the API presentations so far, so we wouldn't be going into the details of API management, but the challenges when it comes to the telco space. So in terms of the agenda, basically what the API management challenges are, the day-to-day API management challenges, because that's relevant to the telco industry as well. And then you've got some unique challenges when it comes to the specific telco space. So we'll be looking at some of those challenges. We'll then be looking at how an API-centric solution should be crafted and an API-centric strategy should be crafted. And basically then go into the WSO2 API management solution and how that basically works in the telco space. We will then go into two areas. One is what's called the single OpCo API management, or an API management solution for operators or mobile network operators. And then we will basically move into what's called the federated API management space. So you then move on to a higher level and federate with multiple operators, multiple regions, so on and so forth. And then finally, let's look at a bit of how the telco plays in the whole IoT area, the M2M area, and how this solution can then basically map into that. So just before that, the case for APIs. Right? So as you are aware, telcos in the past, there are a lot of control, a lot of privacy, a lot of proprietary APIs, a lot of internal APIs, and a lot of investment in these APIs. But today with the whole internet world coming up and many of the old top players coming in and many of the aggregators and players like Skype, Google, so on and so forth, APIs have now become the standard. Right? And this is from Programmable Web from 2013, so that basically shows 2012 stats. In 2011, it was Twitter who has the highest number of API calls per day, but Netflix basically beat that. As you can see, there's a large number of API calls per day. Even in the eBay scenario, so eBay uses the WSO2 ESB as the underlying middleware platform. And on peak Mondays, eBay does up to around 6 billion transactions per day. And that boils down to around $2,000 profit or revenue per second. Right? So APIs are quite an important part of any business, and any business that's planning to become a connected business, which has integrated internally, which is basically now exposing certain services so that they can bring in their stakeholders, bring in their partners, and start building an ecosystem. That's where basically APIs start becoming the building block. So we know that APIs are important, and this is basically a pie chart from Programmable Web again. This is back in 2011, but from 4,000 web APIs, this is like the breakdown of what categories these APIs are being called from. And as you can see, telephony APIs, so this is like the percentage, and telephony APIs still consist of a large number of API calls, and that's normal API calls. If you actually go into Programmable Web and have a look at where these API calls are coming from, the majority is from Twilio, right? And then you've of course got the Skype API calls and then the various telephony API calls like Clickatel and so on and so forth, who are now providing over-the-top services for telco APIs. But this is a huge space because we are now talking about like all of these app development, we're talking about developing ecosystems, we're talking about the Internet of Things and M2M. At the underlying, at the base of this, where the business logic lies, is actually in the telcos. Because telcos have the users, telcos have the networks, they've got the business logic there. So it's important that the telcos now start embracing this change and basically start working with these developer ecosystems and developer communities so that they can start coming up with new business models and participatory business models. So the bottom line is that telco APIs are very, very important, and they are still important. And the bottom line is also that the larger telco vendors and the larger telco players start to get in, should basically start getting involved in this space, because this space is now dominated by the Clickers and the Twilios. So we know the case for APIs, and so the next is basically what are the API management challenges. In the normal API management space, the first question, of course, is to how to create an API-centric enterprise. Right? You've got your organization has a certain set of services and, let's say, network level APIs. First and foremost, of course, you need to sort out your internal business. You need to integrate internally to your backend systems. You need to have a governance model in place, a security model, a big data model, so on and so forth in place. Once all of that is done, you then need to start thinking of how to create an API-centric enterprise. And with this creation of API-centric enterprise comes many key questions, like, let's say, how do you basically handle security? Because now you're exposing key parts of your business and key business logic to the outside world. So that means, first and foremost, handling security, authentication, authorization, subscription management, like who can subscribe to these APIs, who can use these APIs, so on and so forth. Then, of course, you come to how to control your API, how to control access to your APIs. What level of access do you provide to these vendors? Like, let's say there's an organization A, that organization needs to have this level of access to APIs. Let's say they can make 100 API calls per day, whereas organization B is a higher tier, so they have unlimited API calls per day. So you need to basically be able to control access to these APIs. Then, of course, a key part is again monitoring and your service level agreement. When it comes to large enterprises, like telcos specifically, you need to have these service level agreements in place. You need to be able to assure them that you will have a certain quality of service, a certain service SLA standard that you will strive to meet, and basically you need to be able to monitor these API transactions and do certain operations on these API transactions. Revenue generation, again, is quite important in day-to-day API operations, right? Your APIs are now your building blocks. So that means you need to be able to monitor each and every API call, how many times these APIs are called, and even within that API call, you need to be able to monitor how many resources are called independently, what kinds of APIs are called by what regions, what IP addresses, so on and so forth, right? So there needs to be a very advanced revenue generation capability, flexible, not advanced, but flexible revenue generation capability. Then, of course, you have selling your APIs, which includes branding your APIs, publishing your APIs, creating kind of like an ecosystem where vendors and developers, the long tail, the enterprises can basically come in and view these APIs, subscribe to these APIs, so on and so forth. Right? So there's the whole selling your API part. And then, of course, a normal API management solution should focus on the various deployment patterns. Right? You can start with a small API management solution. You need to be able to scale infinitely, scale horizontally, distribute your various components, so on and so forth. So you've got your normal API management challenges. On top of that, Telco basically brings in some unique characteristics as well. Right? So in the telco world, so in the past, telco went out on its own. Right? You don't partner too much. You don't work with the long tail. You don't work with end users. You charge developers for using the APIs, or charge enterprises. Have a revenue share model where you charge the developer and then the developer basically pays you back, so on and so forth. But with the whole internet business model, the whole free or freemium models of APIs are taking off quite a lot. So developers are now used to using the APIs, basically building apps using the APIs, and then allowing the telco to have a rev share model with them. So for example, if I'm a developer and I'm from the developer ecosystem, I should be able to consume and operate as APIs and build an app which has a lot of value. Users would be using the app. Users would start using this service because of my app. And then the telco can basically charge the user and have a revenue share back with the developer. So those are the kinds of business models that telcos need to move into. So you need to empower developers as well. So for example, a developer in the past would take, let's say, 6 to 8 months to build an app. But if you can make the developers' life easier, you can empower them so that they can quickly churn out mobile applications within 2 weeks, for example, where you are able to bundle all these APIs, provide them a rapid application development platform where they quickly churn out applications. So that's a win-win scenario for the telco because you're going to have a rev share model, and finally the business is going to come to you. Control is very important in telcos. So in telcos you have the northbound side where you got the applications, the developers talking to the central infrastructure. You got the southbound side where you talk to your third-party network providers, let's say your SMS provider. You talk to other operators as well. So you need to be able to control access. In the WSO2 world, we call it throttling. So you basically need to be able to throttle access. Say this operator has 100 transactions per second. This operator just gets 10 transactions per second. So you couple that with the whole tenancy model in WSO2 and you get a very flexible way of doing throttling. When it comes to monitoring and SLAs, in the telco world, so in the API management world, we don't usually talk about spend limits too much. We just talk about throttling. So we basically say this guy gets this many calls per day. In the API management, so in the telco world, you have spend limits where you say this user can use up to $10,000 of whatever, or this operator basically has a daily cap of this much, and when you reach this daily cap, I need to start slowing down API calls, maybe start throttling after the daily cap is reached, or basically cut that user off until the next day. Right? So you need to be able to have models where you accumulate all of their usage, do some calculation real time, and then apply certain rules. Experimentation is quite important. In the past telco world, experimentation was not something that was widely supported, but developers want to experiment. So you need to be able to have a sandbox where developers come in and check this SMS API or LBS API, location-based service API, and get certain results. When it comes to revenue generation, of course, statistics and billing models are there, but then you've got the cross-operator revenue share. Right? So we'll talk about a model which allows you to do cross-operator revenue share, but you can basically collaborate with operators as well. And then, of course, you've got the various charging models, the career rate deployments as well. So you've got these challenges in place. How do you basically build a solution? So you're trying to build an API-centric enterprise. That means you're going to expose and manage your APIs. That means you're going to monetize your APIs and you're going to build an API economy around it. So you basically then need to build an API ecosystem, a developer ecosystem which allows all your developers to interact with the organization. You then need to start looking at the long tail as well. So traditionally, you have the short tail, which is the internal developers of the telco itself who build the apps. You then got the trusted partners who basically build more apps who gain more revenue. But nowadays we focus on the long tail, right, which is basically the singular developer who comes, builds an app. That app might turn out to be a killer app that's basically hosted on Google Store or Apple iStore or whatever. And basically the telco needs to start focusing on them as well. And of course you need to embrace newer business models. So building an API-centric enterprise in the WSO2 world means the API management solution. So I'm using the word API management, not API manager, because it's basically a wider solution. Right? It's not just a matter of putting an API manager in there and then letting everything be handled there. So in this diagram, you see the backend services. Right? This is a generic diagram. In the telco world, it will be a different set of services, but it will also have these services. Right? So when it comes to telco world, we usually say SMS and location-based services and payments and so on and so forth. But you also got the CRMs, the ERPs, the Oracle DBs, so on and so forth. And you need to be able to join all of these, integrate all of these to provide a joint service or a collaborative service to the external world. So you would go for a solution which basically has kind of like an API gateway which sits in front as an interface to all of your internal services, which then allows you to do your various quality of service, your SLAs, so on and so forth. Okay. So that brings us to the WSO2 platform. So when I say API management, what I mean is the whole platform, right? Of course, it starts off with the API manager up there. So there are WSO2 API manager which provides like a gateway functionality. You've got the functionality to publish APIs. You've got the functionality to view APIs, subscribe to these APIs, and have a sandbox API which you can test out. And then you've got the functionality to do OAuth or authentication and authorization on these APIs and fine-grained access control. But then you need to move to the next step. So let's say you go and integrate this and deploy this within an operator. And then the next step is basically to see what else the operator needs, what other challenges the operator has, right? So that's where the concept of an orthogonal toolset comes in. So for example, operator A uses this generic solution, but they need to have a workflow associated when you're trying to publish an API. Or when a developer tries to come and sign up, there is an approval phase basically for a certain operator. That means you will have custom workflows. That means like something like a business process server is plugged in. You then, let's say you're going to now integrate to your underlying operators. So let's say you build a generic solution which can be deployed in all of the operators that you want to. But once you want to do integration, you just do some ESB sequences and do the integration to the underlying SMS. And that might take like from 2 hours to just a week. Right? And you're not trying to rebuild your total solution, you're just putting in another component and doing the integration there. So you're separating your concerns out. When it comes to auditing, logging, big data, so on and so forth, the business activity monitor handles that. And that can basically, you can plug that in to your existing logging frameworks, existing logging mechanisms of your OpCo itself. If you need to then do real-time analysis, so for example, spend limits, you need to real-time capture all of these API details, do some calculations, accumulate this information, and at the end of the day, basically run some analysis on that. So something like the complex event processor will do real-time analytics if you want to do spend limits, so on and so forth. And then if you want to do fine-grained access control, if you want to basically do identity management for your whole organization, single sign-on for your whole organization, you might bring in the identity server. So API management in WSO2 makes use of this orthogonal toolset, and of course the whole thing can be run in the cloud as well. Okay, so that brings us to what a developer ecosystem is. So I just put this diagram together. So you would, in a telco, in a typical telco, you would have certain core services that you would want to expose. Right? For in a telco world, that's like location services, messaging services, payment or direct operator billing. You've got the new standards like WebRTC, near-field communications, and then of course all the machine-to-machine, the Internet of Things area as well. Telcos own this, and telcos have these services already. So what the API management layer will do is expose certain services to the outside world, to the developer ecosystem in a controlled manner. So what that means is you now have subscribers, you've got your subscriber base, which might be like 100 million users of the telco itself. You've got the developer ecosystem, which consists of the large enterprises, the developers, the individual developers, the long-tail developers, the various applications, the OTT customers, like let's say Skype and Video and so on and so forth. And everyone basically would be part of this overall ecosystem. And this ecosystem can basically, so you can help this ecosystem, and it makes sense for you to ensure that this ecosystem succeeds. So what you're doing is you're utilizing partners to sell all of your APIs, to create new business, to create new value, and you're basically empowering this ecosystem. And the diagram I'm going to put here at the corner is what's called the WSO2 App Factory. Right? So a normal model, you would just expose these APIs, expect developers to come and use these packaged APIs, let's say the location API, and build a mobile app and basically expose it. What the App Factory allows you to do is to provide like cloud-based environment where you would come and say, I want to create a mobile app for Android. You click on it. That will basically then ask you what APIs of this telco that you want to use, LBS and SMS, and that will basically create you a framework or template, which you then add your additional business logic, and you churn out an application within, let's say, a week, right? Where all of your integration testing, your staging environments, your QA and your ticketing systems, everything's basically integrated. So you take the developer ecosystem to the next level by basically providing something like an App Factory experience where you provide like a rapid application development framework. So just some screenshots of some of the developer ecosystems we worked with. This is something we're working with some of our partners, and whenever later on we'll be talking about these as well. So you can see this is the API store, WSO2 API store customized, and you can see some of the APIs listed on the corner. This is basically from Deutsche Telekom. So Developer Garden is Deutsche Telekom's developer ecosystem, and they basically provide the various APIs as well. You can see the SMS, the MMS APIs, and they basically provide this whole App Factory experience as well. You then have idea-based, which is basically a dialogue project, which is also customization of the API store. And you can see there's a large number of APIs, including the USSD API there. And you can see the sandbox client out there. So that basically allows you to subscribe and then access these sandbox. So you can try out these various APIs. Another project is basically Telefonica and Telino's Bluevia, which is a payment model or payment business model, which does cross-operator payments as well, but it provides you a single interface so that your application can connect and do your various payments, and they will take care of your backend payments. You then got the AT&T developer ecosystem. So I'm just showing you some of the screenshots. Right? So that takes us to how we do telco API management. So initially, you would have your telco, and that would mean you have your network services like SMS, your location, your payment services. You have your backend systems like Diameter, you have your CRMs, your ERPs, which have proprietary protocols. Right? So the first step is to basically start exposing these in a standard way to the outside world. So you have your API manager, you use the API gateway, the store to show your APIs, the publisher to publish your APIs, your auditing and reporting side using WSO2 Business Activity Monitor. And then you start looking at how to actually integrate this level of services to your API management layer. And that's why you bring in maybe the enterprise service bus. You build a set of adapters to actually do the connectivity. So once you build this overall solution, building the adapters is quite quick, right? If you need some customizations there, it's just a bunch of configurations that you do there. You then need to do, let's say, extended workflows. You bring a workflow manager, you do identity via an identity service, and maybe event processing via complex event processes like spend limits, so on and so forth. So what this means is now I can expose a common set of APIs at the top level from the gateway. So I would have an SMS set of APIs, I would have location APIs, LDS APIs, and you build your developer ecosystem around these APIs. Right? So developers would start using those APIs without worrying about the underlying implementation and start building applications around that. Right? And then of course you can bring in something like the App Factory there to help build this ecosystem. So when it comes to these standards, so we've got a speaker from GSMA as well. So GSMA has this one API standard, right? So what we can do at that point is basically expose these as GSMA 1 API up there, and below you use the enterprise service bus to translate your services to the 1 API standard. What that means is you can then take the solution and go deploy it in any other operator, and you are basically just doing a bunch of transformation to just connect those underlying services. Right? So we've done this kind of project, and when we take it to a new operator, it just takes from around 1 week to 4 weeks, depending on the complexity at this level, to actually start exposing APIs in the 1 API standard. Right? And that's basically a project we've done in the past. Right? So let's then move to a federated API. So let's just take the same exact solution. You've got your various operators, you got your API management solution that we look at currently. You then basically bring in what's called a federated API management or a hub model. So what I'm trying to do here is provide a single set of APIs up there, right? So that you can build a developer ecosystem at a central location, and that can then basically route me to my specific operator. Right? So the example here is I'm building an application in the past. I build it at this level here. So if I'm working with Dialog, let's say Dialog has 8 million subscribers, my application can be used by 8 million subscribers. I'm now going to the Asian region and building an app up there using an API up there. So Dialog has 8 million, someone in Indonesia like Excel has like 100 million. And then basically when I build an app using a standard API up there, the routing is done automatically by the hub. And now I have access to 108 million subscribers. So I can then take this model upwards and basically keep on federating upwards so that I cover the whole world. And that's the beauty of federation. Right.
So, two questions. How do you manage the identity and access management? Are they sharing the user stores or single sign-on? Different ways, right? What would be the best strategy for those?
So there are various options. Like the most option that makes sense is basically you have the user store at the operator level itself, because the operator owns the users, and you've got privacy concerns there as well. Right? So you let the operator take care of that. We just federate to the operator and let the operator make a decision. Right? But there are different models in authentication as well, and I think Johannes' talk next would focus a bit more on that. So what you're doing is you're routing as well. You're doing some level of routing at this hub, so that's the major difference. And you basically have ecosystems at different levels. Okay. So what does this mean when it comes to global federated one? So you then can have a model like this where I have your hubs there, right? So you've got a country hub, like let's say this is Sri Lanka, and you've got the different operators in Sri Lanka, and there's an aggregator at that level or federation at that level. You've got a group, like let's say the ASEAN group in Asia. So you've got the head office in Malaysia, so you have a hub there, and you would have like the various operators under the group. Right? What this means is you basically can build an ecosystem at the group level, and you can build applications at the group level, and then basically transparently access the operator's API. And you can keep on going upwards, right? You have a country hub which basically federates all of these. You can maybe have a GSMA hub at the very top level which federates everything, and eventually that will connect the whole world. You also have the concept of, let's say, if you have an aggregator in another country which connects 100 telcos, right? The hub would talk to another hub. Right? So you can have cross-operator business models, cross-hub business models. And let me explain how that works. So you've got an application that's built for the ASEAN group in Malaysia. That application now needs to be used somewhere in Latin America, for example. Right? So that will basically federate to Latin America, and you'll be able to use the same application. At the end of the day, maybe at the end of the month, this operator and that operator will do revenue sharing because they have track of all the API usage, and vice versa. Right? So this allows you to do a large number of various kinds of business models, and basically increases the subscriber base as well. So you've got lots of advantages. You've got the hub-to-hub business model. You've got transparent terms and conditions. You basically have cross-operator business models and the ability to do revenue share. So finally, taking all of this and basically bringing it into some of the topics we've talked about in the past few days, that's the whole Internet of Things area, right? So the Internet of Things are interesting because telcos form the underlying base network to most of these devices, right? We are talking about HTTPS and Wi-Fi, and that area is okay. But the reality is basically you need to deal with SIM cards. And there's another challenge there, of course, which is basically you cannot go around putting a SIM card into each device when the device is provisioned. And then, of course, there's projects like the GSMS. You see that? You've got the GSMA project as well, and you've got the various SOC SIM projects as well, which allows you to do provisioning over the air to these devices. So let's say you've got 100,000 devices, someone buys the device and takes it home, fixes it in their house. The device then starts talking back to the central infrastructure or the device cloud, whatever you call it, and you basically then associate that device with a tenant, operator, a user, so on and so forth. You should also be able to operate these SIMs, activate these SIMs, and then basically ensure that they come online whenever you want them to. So, if you remember, if you've been to Paul's talk yesterday, you would have heard about the device cloud. In that talk, we talked about a device gateway that basically does all of the underlying communication. In this instance, the Telco API management platform that we talked about would also act as the device gateway, which would basically provide a standard set of APIs outside, which can again go through the whole federated model that we talked about. So the device gateway in turn will be in charge of actually talking to the actual devices via SMS, over the air, MQTT, USSD, whatever, because the telco basically has the technology to do that. From a device cloud perspective, you'll have federated API management somewhere, which will also sit next to the device cloud. All of the devices will be registered in the central device cloud. But when you actually want to do like a device provision, or when you want to call a control API, you would go through the whole normal telco federated API model, which would in turn take care of your underlying communication. So take a use case like let's say, so I have chatted with Venu as well in the morning, and one of the use cases is you do location-based services for fleet management. Like let's say Coca-Cola is a multinational organization. you basically want to do fleet management across Europe, right? So fleet management is, so the location-based service is actually coming out, for example, from a Telco initiated call, right? So, but when you're driving across Europe, you need to switch your operators as well. You need to basically get various location-based services, depending on whether you're roaming or whether you're seeing this from a different operator, so on and so forth, right? So from a device cloud perspective, an Internet of Things perspective, we will basically follow this model and do it in a transparent manner. We'll just basically call a device provisioning at the very top level, which will do routing, figure out where this API call is supposed to go to, route you to the API management of this particular telco, and then do a federated model until that talks to your final device, right? So that basically creates a highly scalable way of doing M2M and the Internet of Things. So to summarize, what this basically brings us to is a product sheet for actual telco API management. Like the next presentations would be by Venura, and we'll be basically talking about an actual implementation of what we have done. And the feature list that we talk about here, like for example, MSISD and whitelisting or routing to the actual operators is all done already. So we have done some POCs with some of the operators, and we found out that it takes like from a week to 4 weeks maximum to actually onboard an operator. And that's quite powerful because you just keep on onboarding operators, and that helps to build this overall ecosystem. So that's the summary of this talk. So in essence, APIs are the key building blocks, and telcos need to take this very seriously and start moving very fast into the API management space. There are standards out there like the GSMA1 API and some of the other mobile connect standards that Johannes will talk about next, which is quite helpful in achieving this vision. And this also allows you to come up with new business models like rev share, cross-operator rev share, the whole federated API business model, so on and so forth. Thank you.